You've noticed that the journey to your calling seems to be taking a bit more time than usual. I want to explain the mysterious process that God considers before committing His work into your hands. This video will give you an eye-opening revelation into the way God works and how He shapes your capacity before promoting you. Without wasting much of your time, let's get right into it. It's often easy to hear people pray to God, asking Him to promote them or use them as He used the apostles of the Bible. This in itself isn't a bad prayer, but the truth is all of these mighty men and women God used in the Bible did something most people today don't do. They paid a price, and that price is something not many people are willing to pay. God can use anybody, but the type of character that a person has will determine how far God uses them. For Him to use you, He will first need to train you, and if He cannot train you, He cannot use you. For example, David was anointed as a young boy to be king over Israel, but it was many years of proving, moving, and preparation before he actually took the throne. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd before God commissioned him to lead Israel out of Egypt. Even Jesus didn't begin public ministry until age 30 after spending years in obscurity, obeying the Father, and learning the trade of carpentry. Impatient people despise these seasons of training and testing that precede promotion. They want God to use them on their terms, in their timing, for their glory. However, God is not looking for self-promoters who exalt themselves. He is looking for humble servants who will put His kingdom first and submit to His development process. So what exactly is this process that God takes you through? Let's find out. Whenever you come to God with a willing heart to work for Him, God will accept you, but He will not immediately promote you to the position you are asking for. This is because if God promotes you quickly, you might also ruin that position due to immaturity. So what does God do first? He will begin by testing you in little stages. These are known as micro-tests. A micro-test is a small test that God gives to you to see how obedient someone will be, even in the small, mundane things. For example, you might be walking on the street, and all of a sudden God asks you in a small, still voice to pray. Or you might be about to go visit a friend, and God tells you to stay home and read the Bible. He will give you these tiny little tests to see how you respond to the seemingly insignificant things. Your reaction to these micro-tests gives God insight into your character and readiness for greater responsibility. If you fail these micro-tests, God will realize that you still have a long way to go. In that case, He will give you time to grow, but He will not grant you the initial spiritual promotion request you had asked for before because you failed to pass the micro-stages. In Luke 16:10, Jesus said, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much." But let's assume you obeyed the still, small voice and did pass these micro-tests of obedience in the small things. God will begin to increase the difficulty and sacrifice required in the assignments He gives you. These are called the macro-tests. At this stage, God examines your willingness to obey, even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or not what you expected. For instance, God might prompt you to make peace with someone who had offended you. It will often be something you really find difficult to do, something your flesh will resist. He might tell you to donate money to a relative who has been struggling, and that money might be all you had left. Ultimately, these particular tests reveal whether your faithfulness is conditional and your obedience has limits. The second stage is where most people fail because it directly confronts the flesh, which wars against your soul. Galatians 5:17 says, "For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would." If you refuse or resist these macro tests, you have failed. It shows God that you're not yet ready. What happens with these tests is that when you fail, you will have to repeat them some other time. So if you end up never passing the first two stages, you might never end up being used by God as you always aspired to. However, if you obey God in each situation, you build trust with God that you'll continue obeying when the stakes get even higher. That's why Jesus said, "If you've been faithful in little, you'll be faithful in much." The character developed in the small tests qualifies you for greater tests and responsibilities. Now let me give you a real-life example of how this process works. Imagine this scenario. You've dedicated your life to Christ, and you have a burning desire to serve as a pastor. You pray earnestly for God to use you in powerful ways for His glory. You pass through the initial stages of your journey, and then one day, you find yourself at a new church, ready to begin your service. Upon your arrival, you might expect God to appoint you as the lead pastor immediately, given your fervent dedication. But what does God often do? Instead of placing you in the pulpit, He might guide you to the children's department to serve. In many cases, this unexpected turn can be discouraging. You may even question God's choice, wondering why you're not immediately in the role you envisioned as the lead pastor. In most cases, many people get upset and disappointed. You might begin to feel upset and ask God why on earth He's sending you to the children's department when He clearly knew that you wanted to be the lead pastor. After working in the children's department for a while, you might then expect God to promote you into finally becoming that minister you always dreamt of. But what will He do? He might instead instruct the senior pastor to assign you to the ushering department, which can be another discouraging test. At times, it may feel like the devil is throwing your way some of the most tempting trials you've ever faced. As you stand at the door, ushering people to their seats, some may resist your directions. This can be infuriating, and you might start thinking, "This isn't what I signed up for," or "This church doesn't appreciate my gifts." In response to your frustration and bitterness, the devil might influence you to express your dissatisfaction to the pastor and consider leaving the church. Some might even say God has called them to leave the church and start their own church. As soon as you leave that church, you have instantly failed. Trust me when I say this. This is where many fail. God was ready to test the quality of their character by taking them through stages, but they just weren't patient enough to allow Him to finish His work. The truth is, you may proceed to start your own ministry or church, but no matter how hard you work, it might not thrive because God didn't give you the green light. Do you now see why there are many churches that were not started by God? Many people started churches because they weren't patient and did it by their own will. Miracles and conversions don't take place, which sometimes leads ministers to become fake or false to prove that God is with them. But had you humbled yourself and continued to usher as God had told you to, perhaps God would have used you to pray for a sick person where you were. With that person receiving their healing and giving testimony, you would have gained exposure, and thus the grace of God upon your life would have been evident. Galatians 4:1 says, "Now I say, that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father." So you see, promotion comes from the Lord. Never ever rush ahead of God's timing. Remain faithful where you are planted until the Master sees fit to transplant you. Keep your eyes on Him, not the timetable. Be steadfast when treated poorly and tempted to grow resentful. Sharpen your gifting in faithful service, even if it's thankless for now. As you persevere in obedience and humility, you demonstrate readiness for promotion. Then, in God's strategic timing, He will exalt you and provide bigger opportunities to accomplish great things for His glory. The key is developing character and trustworthy stewardship in the present season, not manipulating or fighting for visibility and position. Seek first His kingdom and trust that, at the proper time, He will use you to impact many lives for eternity. So there you have it. Thank you for watching. If you love our videos, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel.